Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you for having me. I will cut to the chase. When we talk about systematic form meaning mappings, we tend to talk about all this stuff, except that most of the papers that you will see mention non-arbitrary form meaning mappings disregard morphology altogether, except, of course, that's the most systematic mapping between form and meaning. What we typically talk about when we care about the non-arbitrariness of the mapping are things like phonostemes, where certain patterns in orthography correlate, although it's not a one-to-one mapping with meaning. Good example is the word initial GL cluster, which tends to feature in a lot of words in English that are related to light, except that it also features in a bunch of words which are not related to light, but they're all over the place. So there is this cluster of stable form meaning mapping, and then some other stuff going on. And then, of course, also the sound symbolism, the very well-known Takete, Maluma, Kiki, Buba effect, where certain pseudowords are consistently mapped across lifetimes, across cultures, across literacy, across sensory deprivation, sometimes even chicken. They like to map certain strings or certain sounds to certain shapes. I don't have to introduce pseudowords to most of the people in this room, but it's good to keep it in mind. These are typically strings that are devised so that they look plausible in a language, but they lack an established meaning. They're usually employed as control items in psycholinguistic experiments under the hypothesis that they don't carry meaning. For example, in a lexical decision task, you might see a string like dollar and be expected to say that's not a word, and then see something like holler and expect to say, well, that's a word. Except that pseudowords have been shown to trigger many semantic effects, both at the implicit level. For example, there's evidence that the similarity in a distributional space between prime and target in a prime lexical decision influences the reaction time of people saying that krat is not a word. So if krat is preceded by a prime, real word, that shares very little distributional history, subword distributional history with krat, then people will have it easier saying krat is not a word. When a pseudoword is preceded by a prime word that shares semantics in this underlying distributional space, then people take longer to reject krats as not being the word under interference effects. Similarly, in a simple lexical decision task, pseudowords whose distributed representation ends up in a sparse portion of the underlying semantic space take longer to be rejected as not being words, whereas pseudowords that fall into an emptier part of the semantic space are easier to reject. And again, something like this, if it indeed ends up in a sparse semantic neighborhood, looks less like a word, and so it's easier to reject it. There's also plenty of explicit effects whereby pseudowords elicit semantic intuitions along many semantic dimensions, such as size, such as age, such as gender. Also emotions, for example, things like splink. Can you read it? Or is that the color a bit too elusive? Well, splink is happier than froth. Also, cross-modal correspondences, more in the spirit of Buba and Kiki. So if you ask people to draw an ambush, they will draw something like that bulky thingy. And if you ask them to draw a fissile, they will draw that. And if you then ask other people, to tell you which of 4 words gave rise to a particular drawing, then other participants will be above chance. Also valence, which is what I'm going to talk about the most. Fifi sounds more positive than Poitfret. And finally, full definitions. By the way, I think 80% of the stuff that's mentioned here is coming from this building. I'm assuming you're familiar with that. There's a bit of a missing bit in all this research, and that is that whenever we encounter a pseudoword, whenever we encounter a lexical string that we've never encountered before. It's hardly the case that we encounter it in isolation, like all the experimental paradigms I've reviewed assume, but it's likelier that you encounter it in some form of context, be it a sentence, be it a situation, be it both. And so I might show you this string, program. By the way, word, not a word. Is it a real English word? Pseudoword? Okay, that's an English word. Let's see if you can get a bit closer to what it means by seeing it in a context in which it appears in the wild. Any guess on what program might mean?
Knowledgeable and authoritative person.
Okay. Okay, let's narrow it down. Is it a positive or negative word? Positive. Negative. Okay. Now, think a bit of where your intuition comes from. Is it positive because of the sentence in which you read it? Is it positive because the form itself sounds positive? Or if you thought it was negative, the other way around? So what's giving you the intuition here? The context in which it appears or its word form? And you said positive or negative? Okay.
Context that I said positive.
Okay. Program basically means bigot. Something very ingrained in archaic convictions that is not willing to accept new trends and stuff. Okay, so, but it's interesting that it happened right in this audience. There are two sources of information here, and we might prioritize one over the other depending on a bunch of things. So the question is, how strong is the form meaning systematicity that we've been observing in a bunch of experiments and different paradigms that show people have intuitions about pseudowords they've never seen before? And so here, is a cute poifred cute because I'm saying it's cute, or is it not cute because it's called poifred? And remember, poifred feels negative to most English speakers. So we started looking into this using LLMs. This is work that was the thesis of a former student of mine. It's published as a findings paper at ACL. We started from 23,000 words that are rated for valence. I'm sure most of you have worked with this resource. And then 1,500 pseudowords also rated for valence. Of course, LLMs can recognize and encode a pseudoword because their tokenization algorithm breaks pseudowords down into part words by using an algorithm that falls into the broader category of byte pair encoding, meaning that basically before you train an LLM, you run a tokenizer over the corpus, and that tokenizer finds units that are likeliest to be reused productively. So if a word occurs very frequently, the tokenizer will treat it as an unanalyzed unit. Things like cute is cute. If words, and most of the words are low frequency, the tokenizer will try to find the subunits which can be reused to recognize most other words. And so things like, most of the times, morphemes. Ness as an ending, or OUS as an ending, or un as a prefix, things like that. Because the model has in its vocabulary tokens that not necessarily correspond to full words, and the vocabulary contains even single letters, the model can basically recognize and encode any new lexical material you throw at it. Whether the encoding makes sense is a legitimate question, and we're going to have a look at it. The pseudowords were presented as isolated versus in context, and the sentences were created semi-automatically to have different valence profiles, so to consist of content words that are all very positive, or all somewhat positive, or all neutral, all somewhat negative, all very negative, covering the full spectrum. And then we looked at different large language models along important distinctions. Is it a autoregressive model, so that only uses the previous context to predict the new word? Or is it a masked language model, chooses left and right context to fill a blank, trained on monolingual English data or multilingual data, and using different vocab sizes, meaning the number of tokens that the model has in its store? The first question is, do LLMs recognize that pseudowords have a valence, like people have been shown to do? So do LLMs encode Puifred as negative and Fifi as positive, much like they would encode horrific as negative and lovely as positive? Or in other words, do the embeddings of pseudowords resemble the word embeddings in how they encode valence? So we started from this resource mapping 23,000 words to valence ratings. We embedded each word using each LLM, and we considered the static layer. Now, important distinction, LLMs of the post-BERT generation are typically used to produce context-dependent word embeddings, so distributed representations of meaning that is influenced by the sentence context. These architectures typically consist of multiple stacked layers that act as successive abstractions. The very entry point in this hierarchy of transformations is a vector which is the same regardless of context. Static because it never changes. This way we're sure that context, not even the fact that the word is on its own, it doesn't matter. This is a vector that whatever you put around the word, be it nothing or everything, the vector never changes. And we feed it as input to a ridge regressor because these vectors have very high dimensionality. In the case of BERT, 768. In the case of Llama, 4,000. So it's helpful to have some regularization going on to avoid very brittle estimates. And then we did the same with pseudowords. We encoded them. Remember, this happens because of the part words. So Puifred is maybe encoded as P-U-Y FRED, and all the embeddings of these three strings are combined. We feed this to the trained ridge regressor. We obtain the predicted valence. We correlate that predicted valence with the human ratings, and we get a bunch of correlations. This is the full set of 1,500 pseudowords. This is the 25% that got the lowest valence rating, so the most negative. This is the 25% most positive. And this is a subset, which we got challenging set, of about 300 words that look very little like existing words. So some of the 1,500 pseudowords in this data set have a very clear associate. So a real word that you can get to by changing one letter in the pseudoword. Here, we avoided any pseudoword with a word at edit distance 1, meaning that you could get from the pseudoword to the real word by just changing one item, and have at least 3 neighbors at edit distance 2, meaning that it should be very hard for people to see that pseudoword and think, oh, that must be that word. We want to avoid an associative mechanism that LLMs might be pretty good at. The top 2 rows are 2 baselines from the original paper. One is letter unigrams, meaning that each string is a 26 position vector with the count of how often a certain letter appears in the string. So Puifred would be lots of zeros and then 1 over P, 1 over U, 1 over Y, 1 over F, and so on. Fast text, which is a very popular method that doesn't consider context. And then the 5 LLMs that we probed. The English BERT, the multilingual BERT, the Roberta model, GPT-2 medium, and Llama 3.2. Now, across the full set of pseudowords and on the challenging set, the letter unigrams do best. This replicates the finding from the original paper. However, when you start looking into the tails of the distribution, the letter unigrams are not that great anymore. That means that you can tell a positive or a negative pseudoword by the letters it features, but you can't really get to the finer grained distinctions between very negative and mildly negative by just looking at, oh, there's an R. Also, in general, the more negative pseudoword, the most negative pseudowords are correlate better with the models. This dovetails with the idea that sound symbolism is there to trigger very fast responses. And so, for example, emotional sound symbolism, you want somebody to catch that the word is negative as soon as possible. Positive, it doesn't matter as much. And so this basically confirms that there is more sound symbolic or non-arbitrary information in negative pseudowords. And in general, we see that although fast text is competitive, the LLMs always do better even at the static layer. This might have to do with a distinction in where they trace sound symbolism. Fast text basically encodes every word in the training corpus as a set of engrams, including very high frequency words. Whereas the LLMs, because of the byte pair encoding, only treat as like words consisting of subwords the low frequency words. And so it might be that this is very speculative, but it might be that when you consider that big includes the string IG, you're not doing yourself a favor, but you're doing yourself a favor by considering that the string humongous contains lots of large vowels. On the challenging set, the performance is fairly consistent. So it doesn't seem to be that LLMs are only relying on associations with very similar real words. All in all, it seems like we can go forward. These models do encode valence for pseudowords in a way that correlates to some extent with what humans do. Now, what happens to those pseudowords when we plug them in context? So is Puifred the same thing in the first and in the second sentence? Would Puifred get the same embedding in the first sentence if I replace it with Fifi, meaning that only the sentence context matters and not the word form? Again, we started from the word valence ratings. We used them to build 100 sentence templates. There is an empty slot at the end, which is always a noun, so that we delete issues that might have to do with parts of speech. And also, we make it fair when we compare autoregressive and masked models, because basically the only information that the masked model has on top of the autoregressive one is that the sentence ends. But there's no lexical material post-target that a masked model would have access to and an autoregressive model would not have access to. Content words all have a very similar balance. So there are sentence templates with super positive words, sentence templates with super negative words, and everything in between. And they cover the full valence spectrum. Then we compute the average valence of the sentence template as the average valence rating of all the content words. Then we sampled 51 pseudowords. It's not a very large number, but it was the largest number that afforded a uniform distribution covering the full spectrum. Why? As you can expect, most of the pseudowords have valence ratings that fall sort of in between. If you do a random sampling, you basically get just that, and there you don't observe particular differences. So this is a way to maximize the spread of the valence ratings of the pseudowords while having one per bin. We use the same LLMs to get the embedding of the pseudoword at the last layer, whatever the number of the last layer is per architecture. So BERT will be 12, Llama will be 24, GPT will be 16, last. So at the layer where context is doing the most. We feed it to the same ridge regressor that we trained before on static embeddings, and we get a new valence prediction. We subtract the valence prediction that we got from the static embedding, and we get a delta. This is how the predicted valence shifted between static and in context. This becomes the dependent variable in a GAM, where the valence of the sentence template and the valence of the pseudoword are the fixed effects, as well as their interaction, and the sentence template and the pseudoword itself are the random effects. Pause. As one of the reviewers of the paper did not fail to point out, we feed static and contextualized embeddings to the same regressor that was trained on static embedding. This assumes that the two distributional spaces at layer 0 and at layer last are directly comparable. They have the same coordinates. With some LLMs, this is guaranteed by a trick called wait tying, by which the matrix that projects the one-hot vector of the input tokens to the embedding space, the rotation of this matrix is used to unembed the last layer into the logics. Of course, if the matrix is the same, just rotated, the space is the same. Except that BERT doesn't use wait tying, and so this question stands. What we did to make sure that even though the vectors themselves might occupy different portions of the space, because these representations tend to be anisotropic, so the more you go down in the layers, the more the representations all occupy a tighter cone. But this should be systematic to all representations as long as the axes are the same between layer 0 and layer last. So we computed 25,000 embeddings at the static layer for 25,000 English words that appear across many psycholinguistic datasets. And we did the same, so one vector per word, by averaging 50 contextualized vectors from 50 different sentences for the same word. So here we get a vector for dog by finding 50 sentences which contain dog, getting the contextualized embedding for dog across all 50, summing them and average. This gives us a prototype for dog in context. If the two spaces are aligned, then the prototype vector for wolf contextualized should be the nearest neighbor of wolf at the static vector. If this happens, the random baseline is 0.000 something, since there are 25,000 options. So if the nearest neighbor is the word type itself, then we have an aligned space, and we don't need to do any fancy transformation. This happens 66% of the times, so quite a lot more than expected if this was random. Also, when this doesn't happen, many times the nearest neighbor is still semantically related, so that the contextualized nearest neighbor of crying is sobbing. Sometimes it's an inflected form, so absorbs as the nearest neighbor of absorb. Sometimes they share token, such as decade for decadent. Sometimes it's random. Still, we try to permute all the columns so that the cosines within the space are the same, but the space has been rotated, and this never happens. So it's 0% that the same type is the nearest neighbor. Also, we looked at the overlap between the nearest neighbors of wolf static and wolf contextualized. We expect them to be somewhat similar. So 10 nearest neighbors, Jacquard coefficient. 1 means they're always the same, 0 means they're never the same. The median is 0.17, meaning that two neighbors are shared. Again, under random permutation, the median is 0. So answer is yes, we can. And why is it important? It's important because this way we're sure that valence is construed the same way at the static and at the contextualized layer. We're not risking that the two ridge regressors construe valence in different ways because of their training sets. What happens? This is basically a mountain map. The more you go from blue to brown, the more you are panting, the more you're going up. Red lines connect predictions with the same, marginal predictions with the same value. So here, you never cross a red line if you go up. Up is pseudoword valence. You only cross lines if you go right along sentence valence, meaning that whenever you see this pattern, the only thing that matters in predicting the difference is the sentence. This is bird English. To this day, I don't know what's happening. If you have an idea, let me know. So here we have multilingual bird, GPT-2 and llama, where the pseudoword form never matters. So it doesn't matter whether the sentence contains a pseudoword or the other. The valence only comes from the sentence context. Roberta does the opposite, or almost the opposite. When you have a very positive sentence and you put a very negative pseudoword, that negative pseudoword looks way more positive. When you have a super negative sentence and you put in pseudoword, that pseudoword looks more negative. So in Roberta, the two valences interact. If the sentence valence and the pseudoword valence are comparable, the valence doesn't change. So we have three behaviors, but only two that we can actually reconduct to something we can recognize. One is, I don't care what the pseudoword is, I only care about the sentence. And the other is, oh wait, the pseudoword actually matters. If you're having trouble visualizing this, this is a text-to-image generator that uses one of the encoders that places all the emphasis on the context. If you ask the drawing of a portrait, you get quite some variation. If you ask for the drawing of a bopis, you get quite some variation. You can also sort of see the valence difference. Call them cute, and you get the same picture over and over. So it doesn't matter that it's a portrait or a bopis, it's cute, so it's this picture. To wrap up, the part words that a tokenizer finds in the corpus end up encoding systematic form meaning mappings that capture valence in pseudowords, especially so for negative words. Multilingual models seem to have a small edge. Maybe there are slight cross-linguistic systematic mappings, and so having access to multiple languages sort of reinforces the information you can tap. And when you put stuff in context, you get these two different and sort of principled behavior. Either context is all that matters, GPT-2, llama, and multilingual bird, or the pseudoword still carries some weight. Next question is, what do we do? And in order to look into that, we devised this experiment where we have an explicit and an implicit task. The explicit task is a free association task. So people see a string and they're asked to come up with the first three words that they can think of. There is a self-paced reading where there is a sentence context with a bunch of positive words, happy, admire, cute. Then there is a pseudoword, and then there is another word that shares the valence of what came before to maximize potential mismatches. Half of the people saw first the free association and then the self-paced reading. The other half saw first the self-paced reading and then the association. We excluded participants if they failed attention checks. Attention check was, please type these three words without making typos. And also if they failed more than two comprehension questions, which were simple yes/no questions about the sentences they've read. The key manipulation is the polarity of the sentence context and the pseudoword. So we have positive, neutral, negative items. Yes, I factorized. It's already pretty expensive. I didn't have enough money to actually do it using a continuous spectrum, but in principle, you could do that. And also positive, neutral, and negative sentences, which we created manually. The valence cues appear both pre-target and immediately post-target. The question is, what happens when there is a mismatch between the polarity of the sentence and the polarity of the item? We considered pseudowords and real words. The pseudowords consist of 4 or more characters. They don't include existing words that are longer than 3 letters. So a pseudoword like fried bone would not be okay because it contains ride. This also ensures that the tokens that might be recognized in the words by LLMs are not that long. Also, they don't elicit a clear unique associate, so a pseudoword like fantastic would be out of the out of our set. The length is counterbalanced across valence categories, and we also collected plausibility ratings in a survey. Then we considered 40 words, 20 high prevalence words from psycholinguistic norms. The valence category is available in rating studies, so we know which are positive and which are negative. This is our control condition. We expect to see stuff happening here. If we don't, it means our experiment is not that good. We also consider 20 low prevalence items like phogram. Here, the valence category comes from the meaning of the word. That was a pretty painful and tedious part of the experiment because we looked at real words that are known by less than 10% of native speakers in the Brisbane norms, and then we checked what they meant to find some negative, some positive, and some neutral. Again, the length was counterbalanced. Now, these are the items. I hope you can read. I invite you to think of how many of the italicized words you can recognize as words. Four?
Program.
Yeah, well. The sentences were built so that they could basically fit with whatever real word. The low prevalence words and the pseudo words, they were not much of a concern, but the sentences sort of had to work with any of these high prevalence words. These are some of the sentences with the valence cues highlighted. Participants were reading them one word at a time and pressing a button to access the next word in the sentence. What did we measure? We retrieved the valence of the associates that were produced. When we had human ratings, we used the human ratings. When we didn't have the human ratings, we used interpolated ratings derived from embeddings. There's a paper by Hollis and Westbury in which they show that this works decently. They are Z-transformed, so they are immediately comparable. And so the question is, how does the polarity of the sentence influence the balance of the associates with respect to the polarity of the item? Then, obviously, we measure the reaction times in the self-paced reading task. And if people are sensitive to the mismatch in polarity between sentence and item, we would expect that they slow down versus a condition where they match. The sort of sub-question here is whether the low prevalence words pattern with the pseudo words or with the words. They might pattern with the pseudo words because people don't know their meaning, but it might be that people have read them, even though they don't really know what they mean. They might have some trace back there that still pops up in this set. In general, we used GAMS. The critical factor was the interaction between item polarity and sentence polarity over a model which just includes the linear combination. There are random effects for items, participants, and sentence template. Control variables, not all of them are applicable to any model, but that's the full set. The surprisal of the item in context. The edit distance to the likely words in context. So we use an LLM and we ask, okay, which are the 20 words you would expect the most to occur here? And what do they look like? If my pseudo word looks a lot like these 20 words, then it might be that people find it less hard to read, retrieve, integrate. Whether if the pseudo word differs a lot from the expected words, then it might be harder. The length of the item, the trial number, and the plausibility ratings, of course, just for the pseudo words. The word balance checks out. These are positive words, and this is the valence of their associates, above 1 on a Z-transformed scale. This is the negative words, very negative, very significantly different. This is the low prevalence, still different, not as much. So this is our sanity check. People are cooperating with us. The top left, you see the actual model syntax. The data consisted of responses from trials where associates were produced first. So people that did free associate and then SPR. We didn't consider the neutral words. They're not that interesting in the end. The prevalence times item interaction significantly improves model fit. That's good. The pseudoword balance also checks out. This means that our participants see pseudowords the same way as the participants that provided the original ratings. The positive pseudowords have a significantly higher, well, associates of positive pseudowords have significantly higher balance than the associates of the negative pseudowords. And here the critical factor is the item balance, which significantly improves model fit. Now, let's back out from humans and let's look at surprisal estimates from the llama model. This is an autoregressive model. This is a multilingual model. This is a very large model. Large vocabulary, large number of parameters. The surprisal estimates were marginalized to get rid of the bias that comes from a specific tokenization. What does this mean? It means that whenever you have a multi-token word, you need to compute the surprisal for the item as a whole, and this is hell. Because the more tokens you have, the more you need to multiply. And so you get a bias that comes from how much is this string broken down. Could be 3, could be 4, could be 2. If it's 2, you're going to have a lower surprisal than if it's 4, just by virtue of the fact that it's 2 tokens versus 4 tokens. A possible solution to this is marginalization, by which you have the sentence context, whatever comes before your target, and you consider all possible tokenizations, including letter by letter by letter by letter by letter. You compute the probability of the context, and you sum over all possible tokenizations that are warranted by the vocabulary. Then you do the same, but you add your target word. Now, this is again factored in all possible tokenizations, not just the deterministic one that would be preferred by the token. Once you divide the two, you get a surprisal estimate that is not polluted by the specific tokenizer that was used. This way, you can compute surprisal for the whole string and use it as a predictor. What happens? First thing, llama knows low prevalence words, unlike you. So they're less surprising than the pseudowords. They're, of course, more surprising than the high prevalence words. So this is already, I mean, unless you think you're very weird, this is something that sets apart the model from humans. Then, there is a small polarity mismatch for the high prevalence words. Positive items in negative sentence have a higher surprisal than negative items in negative sentences. Positive items in positive sentences have a slightly lower surprisal than negative items in positive sentences. Now, you might think, well, this is actually the entire effect you care about. Depends on what you, which account you side with. If you think of the retrieval integration theory of N400 and P600, then this would be just the initial part of the story. This would indicate a difficulty in retrieval, but there might also be a difficulty in integrating the meaning of a negative sounding pseudoword in a positive sentence. So that's also why surprisal is a control variable in the overall model. It might be that indeed there's no difficulty at integration, but there's also difficulty at retrieval. The sentence context primes you to expect certain forms. You don't see that form, you take longer. Then positive pseudowords seem to be less surprising to llama than neutral and negative pseudowords. Keep it in the back of your mind. These are the details of the reaction time analysis. The item polarity by sentence polarity interaction is the target. We have smooths for surprisal, for trial, for length, for the Levenstein distance to the predicted words, plausibility, and then we have the random effect. We decided to run separate model for the RTs at the target word and the post-target word to see where the mismatch, if anything, appears. We focus on positive and negative sentences and items. Otherwise, there would be too many coefficients and the effects are tiny. We cleaned the data by excluding RTs that were faster than 200 milliseconds or slower than 4 seconds. This is conservative, but there's not much. Finally, we fitted separate models on subsets of the data that are identified by the combination of prevalence and condition, where condition is which experiment they did first. So there are 6 possibilities: high prevalence, low prevalence, null prevalence, because they're pseudowords, free associates before, free associates after. This way we can better see where, if anything, an effect appears. First thing, if you first give them a free associate task and then the self-paced reading, there is a hell of a priming effect, which isn't great because it might obscure pretty much anything. If you first ask them to do the self-paced reading and then ask them for associations, then you see that pseudowords and low prevalence words are much slower than the high prevalence words. The scale is transformed at log 10, so pretty squashed. Now, there is a stronger effect at the post-target item. For high prevalence words, that's nice. So here we see that people read positive words in positive sentences significantly faster than negative items in positive sentences, and vice versa, although smaller difference. Full disclosure, the additive model, so the one without the interaction, is always preferred if you run the compare-ML function, but the AIC is significantly low. This is a sanity check, right? If I'm telling you that I was super excited to see a super cute corpse, you're surprised. It takes longer for you to read corpse. That's what should happen. The fact that it does kind of happen tells me that the fact that I don't find anything here is not because the experiment is bad, but because there likely isn't anything here. There's also very little here. So far, the free associates before, so when people see the pseudoword in isolation, makes sense. The reaction times don't show much for pseudowords. What happens to the free associates after you show the pseudoword in just one sentence context? Very informative, but still just one. Right, sorry. Again, positive pseudowords read slightly faster. This controls for plausibility, so this is not plausibility. I don't know why. So this is for high prevalence words. This is a negative sentence context, neutral sentence context, positive sentence context. The associates are still pretty negative, but the sentence plays a role. So corpse in a cute sentence elicits less negative associates than corpse in a gloomy sentence. Same thing for positive items. This is the pattern you expect when the meaning is there, is strong, is recognized, people agree on what something means. This is low prevalence words. Everything that matters is the sentence. The low prevalence word doesn't trigger anything. Remember, low prevalence words were not selected because of sound symbolic effects. They were chosen for meaning. People don't know the meaning. The sentence does everything. There is no sound symbolic information you can sort of grasp onto. The sentence does everything. So between this and this, where do you expect pseudowords to fall? More like this, something in between. This, something in between. Conservative. The item balance significantly improves model fit. The interaction doesn't, but it's not a huge effect. But if I have a positive pseudoword in a negative sentence, it will elicit slightly more positive associates than a negative pseudoword in comparable sentence contexts. Same for neutral contexts. Positive contexts, effect disappears. So Some lessons learned. Big priming effect. I'm going to save some money next by changing the before condition into an only condition. So people will take 5 minutes instead of 20 to complete the experiment. Also, neutral pseudowords are useless. The effects are way too tiny to observe whether neutral valence causes a mismatch with respect to the sentence or not. Again, I'm going to collect more ratings and responses on the extremes of the distribution, also to have some more statistical power. Then some findings. The low prevalence words are effectively pseudowords to people, by and large, but not for LLMs. So whenever you want to get information, predictors, stuff from LLMs to model stuff that happens in the tail of the distribution, think twice, because that's not what people are going to do, by and large. The polarity mismatch only influences RTs when you have the meaning of the word well known to you. The meaning of low prevalence words doesn't matter. People don't know it. The form of pseudowords doesn't matter. People don't seem to care. The polarity of pseudowords, though, slightly influences the associate's valence after the self-paced reading task, but not for low prevalence words. So there seems to be a role for the form of the pseudoword in still sort of influence the kind of words you think first. This is a very exploratory question, but we took the pseudowords and we anagrammed them to get a sense of how much, remember, from the computational exploration, a model that correlates very well relies on unigrams. So it shouldn't matter where you put the unigram if that's what matters. So by this, we're testing the role of very specific letters in valence perception. Although we're testing a very strict hypothesis, there's no control of phonology, and there's no control of start and end letters. Why no control of start and end letters? Because the pseudowords need to be legitimate, and once you start swapping around stuff, if the first and last letter are locked, there were items for which we couldn't find any pseudoword that would be phonotactically legitimate or that wouldn't give rise to a one unique associate. Why no phonology? Because it's hell in English. Italian might actually be a lot better in this respect. So how did we test this? This was a fun statistical problem for me, at least. We have the trial, the smooth for trial. We have the item valence and a condition that says whether the string is an original pseudoword with ratings or an anagram. We have random effects for the original pseudoword, which is the same whether for the original form and the anagram pertaining to the same original pseudoword, the subject. And then we test whether random slopes for the anagram condition over the original string improve model fit. The assumption is that if that does improve model fit, it means that there is variability in the items across the anagram condition. Why this might be, I mean, we care about movements of whatever direction, not necessarily systematic movements by which anagrammed positive pseudowords are less positive as a whole, or negative pseudowords are less negative when anagrammed or more negative. We just care whether some stuff stays or moves. As you can see, stuff moves. These are the original pseudowords, and you see a pretty clear distinction between the negative and the positive. You anagram them, and they mix. Here, we had to remove 4 anagram and original pair because we didn't notice, but our English participants did. The anagrams had a pretty clear associate. For example, this pseudoword, people clearly went to cigarettes. So the valence doesn't really say anymore because they clearly saw cig and went for cigarettes. One caveat, the plausibility ratings at the time of this analysis are not available for the anagrams, so we still need to control for that. With this, again, very exploratory, suggests that it's not all about the individual letters. It might be tied with the first and last letter. It might be tied to consonant clusters. It might be tied to phonology. Don't know yet, but that's there. What's left to do? We want to analyze the semantic coherence of the associates and see whether the sentence changes this, such that for an isolated pseudoword, associates are semantically unrelated, whereas once the pseudoword appears in a sentence, then suddenly the associates all sort of map to each other, or the other, or not. Also, the edit distance of the associates to the Q word. Wayward associations are a known phenomenon in free associates. Also, cross-linguistic effects. We're planning on taking the pseudowords as rated by English speakers and embed them in Italian or Dutch sentences. Dutch shouldn't change too much. Italian is a bit of a more interesting question. If the associates that Italians produce for negative words according to English people are also negative, then this would be evidence that they're tapping onto a shared substrate. If they're not, it means it veers more towards some sort of language-dependent systematicity effect. Of course, I'm always up to do stuff with other people. I'm also very interested in the kind of efforts that translators do in children book. This is a real book, which is called Animals Nobody Has Seen Except Us. It's a great book that was originally written in Swedish. And this animal that nobody has seen except us now is called a Klumpanthropus. And the Italian translation decided this. And I would really like to talk to the translator and ask, how did you get there? Some names are made up, some names are repurposed existing words. One of the animals is called Il Bipolare. Clearly something is going on. I mean, I think we can all agree that Klumpanthropus should not be the word for a cute little thing, even though that's Swedish. But again, that's there. This is many ways in which you can find me and the stuff I've been doing. This is a bunch of the stuff I cited in the talk, and these are all the icons I used. And now I would like your input. So in case you don't have questions, I do.
I do have a curiosity. Some points near the beginning where you compared different graphs. Yeah. I was wondering whether you had tried to compare different levels of distillation of the same model, because, for example, in Llama, available with was 1, 3, 7.
No, the short answer is no. We didn't test different versions of the same model.
I think it might be interesting to see at which level or how important the encoding of balance is in that model.
Do you have a specific hypothesis that smaller, more distilled models should lose information, or should?
Yeah, definitely, because for the purpose predicting text, I don't think balance is as important as many other information. So I think this is one of the types of information that would be lost earlier in distilling models.
Okay. If you look at like PCA studies on the dimensions that capture the most variance in the distributional space, you typically find that balance is among the top 3. So it might be true, but actually when you were saying that, I was thinking actually maybe more distilled model show this even more. So there might be something going on about compression, like to what extent the signal is compressed in more distilled models. But to me, that would actually ring the bell of like balance predicting more. Like there are some psychological constructs that tend to be preserved by PCA dimensions. One is gender, which is of course often grammaticalized or lexicalized, but the others are balance, intensity, concreteness. Yeah.
I have a question on the difference between pseudowords and
Okay.
rare words, essentially. So the rare words are kind of a heterogeneous category, right?
Yes.
So you have long words, you have artifact stuff, you
Yes.
have technical jargon. So could it be that there is definitely a night distinction effect, but it's more related to the fact that people have less of lexical distribution that are familiar to them and that they can rely upon when evaluating them?
Could be.
So the pseudo words are more words than regular
Yes.
actual words.
Yes.
And
Well, the pseudowords that we chose are like from the extreme of the best word scaling distribution. So these are words, pseudowords over which people tend to have a higher agreement, right? Yeah, I mean, it was hard to find 20 low prevalence words that had a clear balance. But yeah.
And the models, can you verify? That's kind of related to this. You can in principle verify whether that word is included as a token.
Yes.
Which are actually listed in the.
These are never.
Never.
For Llama, no. For other models, they might still work in progress, but these are.
For the model, they are actual pseudowords as much as the other.
But still, they are less surprising.
But the models are their own multi-language model.
No, the one I've only tested Llama for this.
Okay.
For Llama, these are less surprising than these. It might be that these are actually fewer tokens. I don't have a distribution of in how many tokens are the low prevalence words split versus the high prevalence words. Well, the high prevalence words are definitely one token. The pseudo words will, especially because of the constraint that no real word can occur inside the pseudo word. It might be that, I mean, just for example, here, home is.
Yeah. Just curious, I've lost the information. How do you think it gets the words? Are there Wookiee pseudowords?
No, they are Wookiee pseudowords. They come from the dataset from Daniele and Fritz. They took 1,500 pseudowords. They ran a best word scaling, and they. But they were heavily filtered.
Yeah.
So not to have any clear associate, not to contain any real word.
Because I was concentrating more on the actual formal part, and that gets a lot of the words, like there's a hint of morphology.
Yeah, I mean, you see them there.
And some
these are the actual pseudowords that we use. So there are some examples of morphology like profused or gropeness, but for the most part,
something that maybe example logically or default, or I was wondering if there is something in the form of the pseudowords that could switch like tip the scale in favor of form over sentence in some of the cases. I don't know, because they also sounds like brands sometimes, like Arbol is of course a medicine. It's a drug. So that's maybe they also get
you can, so these are the positive and negative. So the one that elicits the most positive associates is viewed.
Of course.
The least positive is sagte. And then you see something like vugloi tends to elicit pretty negative associates, but you anagram it into logiv and suddenly positive associates. So yeah, I mean, of course, the specific item matters a lot.
Yeah, it was just but it's necessary in here. I mean,
No, I mean,
more of trying to find why.
Yeah. So
Because
the-
maybe there is some like hints or vestiges or mini mapping that are coming and they're bringing together.
yeah, I would say that this branch definitely relies on the fact that this
This is almost a word, right? It's really
and also miscalled and growth. So where you actually see some
yes.
morphology like
Even if it's very, very like I wouldn't say like strong.
Yeah.
It's just an hint of, right?
yeah.
That's really interesting though.
But so this goes precisely in the direction of trying to pin down where this is coming from. The
It's
problem,
very interesting that pseudowords sounds more like in some cases are nicer than
Yeah.
actual words with low probability.
the problem is that until we find a model whose predictions we trust, this is extremely expensive. And I don't have a model where I say, okay, I give you some featureization of this, you give me a predicted balance, and then I start playing around by changing only the first and last letter, by removing some. If I have to do it with people, the degrees of freedom are infinite, and my money is not. So you absolutely need some form of simulation, and for that you need a model whose outcome you trust. A correlation of 0.5 is not something I trust yet, because it could give rise to all sorts of artifacts and systematic divergences. So, I mean, consider that for this, to obtain this value, this pseudoword has been shown to 40 people, 30 people that produced associates. Unless we try to do the small word of words or pseudowords.
Yeah. I mean, it's so easy to do it with words. Yes.
But there are so many things you can check. And I mean, one of the reasons why I think doing this with Italian could be interesting, or more interesting than with English, is that at least I can rule out the phonology.
That's good.
If people produce radically different associates or associates with radically different valence when I anagram pseudowords that look like Italian, it wouldn't be phonology. Here, I mean,
Yes, I think that, I mean, even if you have people like read the pseudowords that will come up with completely different.
yeah. So on that, I'm working with people from Aberdeen that have something like that. So they have a data set where they asked people to produce pseudowords spoken. They are transcribing them, and I think it's a fair start. I think it would be great to like try to see what a speech model does.
Are doing that?
Yes, that was exactly my worry.
They also tend to read more letter to letter than they do in like South America.
I think it's going to be a problem more for the person that is transcribing the Scottish accent rendition of English pseudowords. I will get transcriptions. But in principle, you can do something with like a speech to text model that embeds those audio files and see what happens there.
It's extremely interesting. And the balance is something that comes up every time you have to do something with meaning. And it's really difficult to pinpoint what is carrying balance actually, like at an explicit level. And it's thank you, sorry.
Yeah, no question from Ellie says wonderful.
Thank you.
Would you selecting words or the balance for small? There is a pattern or like share and
Yeah, the tokenization like rings like an alarm to me though, because the fact that the the different LLMs produce comparable predictions in terms of valence given the embedding, despite the different, possibly different tokenization, then would sort of ring an alarm bell to me saying, okay, but then why? Then what if the tokens are so different, then why is the prediction similar? And at the same time, if the pseudo words for which the predictions are similar are the ones which are tokenized the same regardless of the model, then it's an easy answer. So I'm in principle, it could be a way to single out experimental items, but at a very superficial level, it seems to me it's either there's a very clear reason, or there's a reason I would have no idea how to actually model. Because like one would need the same thing that we did for marginalizing probabilities for marginalizing embeddings, that you get the embedding of a word in BERT regardless of how it's tokenized. But that sort of, I wouldn't know how to do it because of the contextualization. In principle, yes, but I don't think I have the machinery to actually study that at a non-trivial level.
I was wondering what you think makes. So, like, what happens if you scramble full word? What is it that shorten the word, the sentence, I don't know, 5 sentences, but the effect arises? What is your prediction?
So I can start by saying we wanted to have a context which was really unambiguous. So we wanted to have sentence contexts that were extremely positive, extremely negative, or plain boring. We have sentence context where the valence Q is brought by at most 3 content words. So it's not like there is a ton of words that are really balanced. If you take away, I mean, if you have 2 and you take away 1, it might still occur, but to a lower degree. I think it would also make a big difference whether you remove. So if I get rid of this, I think it would hurt more than if I get rid of this. So like the 3 nominal adjective, I think is doing the heavy lifting here in contextualizing the pseudo word as positive, negative, or neutral. So if you say Emma felt a wave of joy after seeing a pseudo word, I don't think it would be as strong, the context cue. But if you say something like Emma saw an amazing, then it would be almost the same. That would be my prediction. Sorry? For the self-paced reading, it would make no sense, right? For the associations, I think it would
say it's like the reader might say, "Oh, that's not right." So even though you like the single chunks bring in principle meaningful information,
yeah,
the reader might say, "Oh, that's just like a word salad."
Yeah.
I'm not going to care, and maybe in that context,
Mhm.
the word itself, even
Could be, yeah. I think it's a fair prediction. I don't think just having something like Wade felt a of seeing amazing and Puifred would give rise to particular associations for Puifred that are not carried by the form itself. But I mean, if it were that the same effects arise when you just scramble the syntax, what that would be evidence of for you?
well, but each like is more about the semantics of each and
Right. Yeah.
unit.
So for LLMs, there is this study by Sina and colleagues where they scramble the order of words and they look at how the embeddings change and they don't change much, which is a big red flag for LLMs being basically just distributional learners on steroid. But that was before chatbots and instruction tuning and all the post-training stuff that is going on now. I don't think people work the same, so I would be inclined to think that if you destroy the syntax, and you ask associates for a pseudoword that has been seen in the word salad, then it would be the pseudoword. I'm also curious to see if you give this to second language learners of English, whether the form of the word plays more of a role. Might be because the semantics of the context is less entrenched in their mental lexicon.
Because ultimately, to me, like the target and everything else. So you like play around with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Again, this is a pretty conservative design for a first exploratory study. Like we wanted to maximize the chances that if there's something, we see it and not have to say, oh, we didn't find it, but it might be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and down to double letters. That's also why we sort of spend some of the trials on real words, because at least now I see the key shape for high prevalence words, and the fact that I don't see it elsewhere, it says to me about that. Most likely it isn't there. Whether it's a problem of retrieval or integration, I don't know. You would need EEG for that.
What startup we couldn't similar experiment from faces paired with positive. So in neutral cases with no expression, with positive and images, and the expression is positive.
Okay. But so
Like this and context for pure kind.
yeah, but the fact that then the word amazing could be like the first word, and then the target pseudoword is like 7 words apart, might destroy any relation you might make. I mean, the use of a prenomial adjective was really to say, okay, I'm really describing this. Whereas if you destroy this dependency, then it might be that amazing refers to something else, and then you might want to keep some sort of local dependencies intact, even in the scrambling, and then maybe. But I think it boils down to informativeness, right? If I have no information, but then that dependency, the local dependency is informative, then it will be maybe magnified. But if I destroy all dependency relations, then what am I really saying is amazing?
Question, have you tried have evaluations from LLMs of the actual tokens? So try to estimate the balance of the actual things that the token items produce.
So ask another, like take the llama tokens and ask another LLM, is this positive or negative?
Yeah.
No.
Because the check also whether, so if you do that and you come up with the most informative tokens also be also being the ones that some symbolism literature has and identified qualitatively, and maybe they even know cross-linguistically.
Yeah, so this is coming up more and more, so I think it's cooking somewhere. I talked with a PhD student at Stanford who wanted to sort of understand which tokens in low resource languages carry the meaning. And that would be great for this. The problem we ran into is how you validate it. Like, how do you set up a protocol such that you can trust the ratings that the model give you? Because I might do this, right? And then ChatGPT tells me, let's not use ChatGPT, let's see, Mistral tells me this token is very positive, this token is very negative. How do I trust it? How do I, like, what is the word condition from this experiment for that analysis? And I mean, it was just one video call, but we didn't find a solution.
But you could take those neurons that respond almost selectively to balance for words, see whether they respond selectively to balance of the.
Okay, yeah. No, but that's representation based. It doesn't. Yeah, that's more validated already. But we were thinking about like compounds and see whether the head of the compound actually carries the meaning. The problem is that you would need semantic similarity ratings or semantic relatedness ratings for lots of compounds that the model chops up in reasonable ways. And we couldn't really find a resource that gives you that kind of derived or compound words at scale such that you would have enough statistical power to say, oh, okay, this is 2 tokens for the model. I knock out this token. What does the predicted similarity is? I knock down the other token. So we were a bit at a loss with respect to what data do we use to do this. But looking at neurons that are selective might be more interesting. I mean, you could also like borrow the ridge regressor from the first experiment, feed it the representation of a single token, and see what happens.
You had questions.
I had questions, yes. First one is the most important. Like, this is one thing I could do more to strengthen the results, but are there things where you went like, I'm not sure? In terms of experimental paradigm, in terms of statistical analysis, in terms of design choices, stimuli. Yeah. Yeah, but that's I mean, it can be a different paper.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, I mean, if this comes out, like the human part, the computational part is already out, but if the human experiment comes out as is, plus the coherence, Levenshtein distance, and suppose it lands on your desk, would you say, you should do that?
Absolutely. Also, the controls are quite interesting. I really like the control with surprisal. It's actually quite interesting because you see that sort of positivity negativity bias, and
yeah,
on the interpretation base, I think it's quite interesting that I'm not sure what's going on, but there is some negativity.
Yeah, and polarity asymmetries, but they're all over the place. So it's really hard to pin them down.
Might even be something to expand further somewhere else.
Yeah.
Does the frequency or prevalence of the contextual anchors, so like the positive or negative or neutral words in the context that actually some balance, like so in your example there was like mesmerized.
We haven't checked.
Does it give stronger positivity or negativity?
We haven't checked.
Should be here or
Yeah.
get
I think that's easy to do.
that would be my question, probably as a reviewer.
Yeah, no, but this makes sense.
It's not great.
We haven't looked at random intercepts and slopes for specific items. Also, I mean, to look at random slopes for specific items, I don't think I have enough statistical power. Like to look at the interaction sentence template by sentence template or item by item, I don't think there's enough. I think I have like 30 responses per combination. But I'm thinking of collecting more. Originally, I wanted to do it for 4 languages, the 4th being Finnish. And then I asked the Finnish PhD in my department, which of these 1,500 pseudo words would work in Finnish? And the response was 2. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to do it. So I have a bunch of money that was allocated to doing the same for Finnish that I can sort of repurpose to have larger sample size for English and Dutch and Italian.
There is some strength of the
Yeah.
borders carried by.
No, but that's
how-
a nice way to sort of synthesize information about a specific item into one dimension, which is like the average prevalence of the pure words. It's a good one. Thank you.
Senza con lei è competire, però con tutto
Si era bloccato il professore della
Ma non lo so,